Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Craig Strang. I'm the Associate Director of the Lawrence Hall of Science at the University of California, Berkeley. It's really fantastic to see such a large crowd here on Zoom, and I know we're live streaming for others that are in the overflow. So welcome to all of you, regardless of what platform you're on. I want to just open by saying a few words about what brings us together today and what we hope to accomplish. We have a proposal to share that we hope will kick off a planning process and a novel solution to a seemingly insoluble problem. Our schools face a challenge of epic proportions that's related to opening in the fall. It's a challenge of time and space. Schools just don't have enough space to allow our students to safely engage in face-to-face learning at the same time. Most of the solutions in discussion that we're hearing about rely on decreasing the amount of time that kids will be at school through staggered schedules and distance learning. And we know that distance learning has resulted in massive inequities this spring, and that in many districts, half or more of all students, mostly those from communities of color and low-income communities, never logged on once. In one of our California districts that we've been partnering with, about 60% of all the Chromebooks and hotspots that were distributed were never turned on. At the same moment, over a third of all the environmental and outdoor learning organizations in the country are highly unlikely to ever reopen, and three-quarters of them are uncertain about being able to reopen. Over 30,000 outdoor educators are out of work, a skilled workforce waiting to be redeployed. So our proposal is for an ambitious, unprecedented, mutually beneficial partnership between the formal K-12 sector and community-based organizations to expand the capacity of schools to bring more students back to school for higher quality and more equitable learning by planning for large-scale learning outdoors. We're proposing to increase the healthy space available to our students rather than decreasing the amount of time for learning that's available to them. So today on this webinar, we're going to be moving fairly quickly through as much information as we can in the first part of the meeting. But I want to let you all know that the information will be available to everyone after the session. And the second half of this session is going to be more interactive and discussion based. Next slide, please. We want to acknowledge before we start the recent racist events in Minnesota, New York City, Georgia, Kentucky, California, and countless others around the country that haven't received national media attention. While some of the incidents have made their way into the national news and discourse, they're not by any means isolated, nor is the racism that underlies them. And we want to acknowledge that racism and racist structures and systems extend beyond police violence. Many of our education systems and structures are rooted in racism and systems of oppression. And this is a time for us to engage in greater self-examination of our institutions, our policies, and the impact that they have on communities of color, including within our own organizations and our education system. We hope that in some small way, the ideas in this workshop can play a role in bringing about reflection on teaching and learning, support for local place-based solutions, and can promote justice and belonging. We also want to honor that wherever we are in North America, wherever you're watching this and participating in this webinar from, we're on stolen and occupied land. And we invite you all, using the chat function, to acknowledge the indigenous people whose land you're on now. And please name those people in the chat if you know who they are. Thank you so much. Keep going. As a reminder to you all, land acknowledgements like this are just one small way to contribute to decolonization and land justice movements. And we encourage you all to think about deeper ways that you're currently partnering with or could partner with Indigenous people, and how you and your organization can uphold Indigenous sovereignty. Next, I want to share with you the team that has been putting on this event for you and is leading the proposal that we're going to roll out today. Next slide, please. This is the team. Green Schoolyards America has been doing most of the heavy lifting. Lawrence Hall of Science, San Mateo County Office of Education, 10 Strands here in San Francisco. And there are many other supporting organizations that have contributed to our thinking. And you can see there on the screen the names of those of us that are going to be sharing information with you today. Here's a look at where you all came from, at least where those of you who registered for this meeting came from. We had about 1,000 people register, and this is the demographic breakdown of those people. We're not sure yet where those of you actually that have joined us have come from. And so we'd like to do a quick poll. And we're going to have 2 questions in this poll that we would like you to respond to as quickly as you can. The first poll is who's in the room, and we'd like you to share a little bit about what roles you play and what kinds of organizations you work in. And then if you just scroll down in the first poll question, place your cursor and scroll to the second question. We'd like you to identify the most pressing problem that you're hoping to solve. And we know that you're probably all trying to solve many problems, and we want you to try and prioritize a little bit and think about which is the one that you're thinking is the most pressing at this particular moment in time. It is so amazing and gratifying to see so many school and district people participating. We know the huge stress that you've been under over the last 3 months. Essential workers, first responders, taking care of our kids, trying to provide learning experiences for them in these unprecedented conditions. So thank you so much. 41% so far of all of you online are representing schools and districts. Another 4% from county offices of education, 12% parents, 31% from informal education institutions, and a handful of parks, grant-making foundations, public agencies, and 18% who are other. And if you checked other, you could also write in the chat what type of organization you're representing. And then in terms of the problems that you're trying to solve, it looks like 41% promoting outdoor learning and environmental literacy, 23% getting students back to school safely, 14% ensuring high quality teaching and learning experiences, addressing vast inequities resulting from online learning, 15%. Thank you all for responding to the poll. The last thing that I want to mention is that we have a note-taking system that we've set up for this meeting. rather than using the chat, which just streams all of your comments in a stream of consciousness, we're going to be using this platform called Padlet. And you will be able to contribute your ideas and thoughts in categories this way, and we'll be able to better capture your thinking. If you go to that link now, you can have the Padlet open for the entire time of this presentation and webinar. You can make contributions at any time during the presentation. And then at one point during our meeting today, we're going to be moving you into breakout groups to have smaller group discussions. And we will use the Padlet in a very particular way during those breakout groups, but it's there the entire time. Please share your thoughts with us and your ideas, and we will capture them and send them out, make the whole Padlet available to you after the webinar is concluded. And with that, I'm going to turn over the microphone here to Sharon Danks from Green Schoolyards America.
Thank you, Craig. Next slide, please. Hi, everybody. My name is Sharon Danks, and I'm the director of a nonprofit organization called Green Schoolyards America, based in Berkeley, California. And in ordinary times, Green Schoolyards America's work focuses on helping school districts use their school grounds to the fullest to improve children's well-being, learning, and play, while contributing to ecological health and resilience of their cities. We work to change the norm for school ground design, use, and management so that all children and youth will have access to the natural world and the places that they already visit on a daily basis. Today, my partners and I are collaborating to share an idea we've been exploring that we think has potential to improve children's experiences in the next school year and address some of the problems that have surfaced, Craig talked about, due to the physical distancing measures that are required to keep us all healthy and safe. We plan to spend the next hour or so together presenting some of the things we've been discussing internally, and also asking for your feedback and input. And since the current year is about to end and the next one will be coming up soon before we know it, there's real urgency around this topic and time pressure to help school districts find a path forward. We recognize that this timeline is impossibly short, and the systems that we hope to change are incredibly complex. With that in mind, we're sharing ideas today that are still in development. Paint's not yet dry, and we're asking for your help. Our goal is to gather an interdisciplinary community from around the country who can join us in expanding and deepening these ideas, and then collaborate to put them into practice. Next slide, please. We also recognize that there is no single path forward. We'll be sharing examples to show that there are many workable solutions that will help school districts across the country take learning outside. These ideas are adaptable and will look a little different in different climates and communities and grade levels and ecosystems and teaching styles, and with varying budgets and levels of scale. Next, please. We'll start today with an overview of the idea we're proposing and some background information and the benefits that we see to this approach, build on what Craig was just saying. And next we'll have our first breakout session where you'll have a chance to meet with others who are here today and share your reflections. And for those who are here on live stream, you'll also be able to get to the Padlet link, just as Craig described. And then we'll reconvene and explore this idea and what it could look like in practice, sharing some studies and scenarios and strategies we've started to explore for outdoor infrastructure and the academic instruction components that go with it. We'll have a second breakout session that's a little longer after that to hear your ideas and gather feedback. And we'll close with a conversation about our next steps and an invitation for you to stay involved as we move forward. Next, please. We want to let you know that from the beginning that we see this meeting today as the kickoff for a planning process that will continue into the summer. And in the next 2 weeks, we'll be establishing 8 working groups on a range of subtopics that will develop adaptable frameworks, strategies, and resources to share with school districts and their partners across the country. We hope you'll participate, and we'll tell you more about how to get involved with that at the end of our session today. Next slide, please. So what exactly is the problem that we're working on? I'm sure we're all familiar with it in one way or another. The physical distancing that will be required when schools reopen next fall is present, but our schools weren't built to accommodate children 6 feet apart. We've been collaborating with our colleagues at the National Council on School Facilities and Cooperative Strategies, LLC, to understand what this means. They estimate, after running the numbers on internal building capacity, that most schools across the country will only be able to fit about 60% of their enrolled students in their classrooms with the required spacing. Some schools might be able to accommodate a higher percentage if their schools have low enrollment or if they are able to use rooms like the cafeteria to hold classes. But the majority of the 100,000 schools in the country need another solution to address this spatial problem and be able to accommodate all of their students. Next slide, please. Many school districts are turning to staggered schedules and online learning. And we know from experience over the last 3 months that despite the hard work and the heroic efforts on the part of the school districts and educators, that there are significant and widespread problems with online learning, and that staggered schedules will be very hard on children and families. And Craig went into the reasons that is, and there's some listed on the screen there. Next, please. There are also benefits to taking learning outside during this time and all the time. Right now, there is a possibility that outdoor learning can expand class meeting space and take some of the burden off of those tight indoor spaces, making it easier for schools to accommodate larger numbers of students safely on their site. It'll also mean that students can spread out farther when they're on campus, and can also teachers can also offer more hands-on learning opportunities that enhance the curriculum when they use the ground as part of their lesson. Outdoor environments typically have better air quality than indoor spaces, and environmental conditions such as wind and sunlight may also reduce the amount of virus that's present on a surface and the length of time that it can stay viable, according to the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And the very presence of trees and nature outside also has been shown to reduce stress levels and to improve mental health, which is crucially important for kids who might be returning from this pandemic with trauma in their life and need to alleviate that and improve their mental health. Next slide, please. So we're proposing a vision that we ask school districts to consider using any outdoor infrastructure that they already have and expanding it where needed to create simple outdoor classroom spaces for their students to use. These spaces will look different in each climate and location, but most of them would include basic seating, protection from the elements like sun, rain, wind, and snow, outdoor teaching supplies and clothing so that everyone can go outside, and storage for teaching materials. Next. And this approach can be used, next please. This approach can be used on a small scale. For example, with an individual teacher who chooses to take her class outside to do a writing assignment on a clipboard sitting under a tree, or on a much bigger scale where we think 50 to 100% of the students returning to campus could be spending their whole day outdoors in a more formally established dedicated outdoor classroom spaces. We know that school grounds vary greatly in size and form, and also recognize that schools that are starting with an empty asphalt slab will have a lot more work to do to make their grounds comfortable and inviting than other schools that already have grass and trees and gardens on site. So for this reason, we see the school grounds as the first place that we can look to take classes outside, but it's not the only one. For schools that are within walking distance of a public park, we're also proposing that they could consider building a relationship with the local park department and investigating whether they can move a portion of their classes into the parks. For schools that can't use their school grounds and aren't near a park, a third option would be to use buses to transport students to the closest suitable outdoor space. Next slide, please. We know too that many different parts of a school's program normally use the school grounds during the school day. PE classes need space for their curriculum, elementary schools need space for recess, and before and after school programs often use the grounds as well for their own activities. So all of these uses need to be coordinated and with the outdoor learning idea, and they will affect placement of the outdoor seating areas that are selected for each site. Next, please. Most schools around the country are now working on plans to divide their students in half to create smaller class sizes. We recognize that if schools take students outside for hands-on learning, they'll be limited not only by space, but also by the number of available educators. So we'd like to propose that school districts partner with local non-formal education institutions like museums and nature centers to help them meet some of their temporary staffing needs during this time. My colleagues will speak to this aspect of the program later in the session. Next, please.
Sharon, 2 minutes.
Yep, next. And there's historic precedent for this work. 100 years ago, during the tuberculosis and Spanish flu epidemics, schools all over the world took their kids outside, just as we're proposing. Next. We also have the Green Schoolyard movement that's been existing for 30 years as an asset to use in helping us make this transition. There are hundreds of organizations across the country and thousands of schools that already have at least some experience bringing kids outside for outdoor learning. And we'll build on this wealth of knowledge and experience to help us scale up outdoor learning in this time of crisis. Next. The goal is to have a green schoolyard and to go outside and use your grounds is a worthy goal outside of this crisis as well. And we just want to say that our normal work is about using these grounds to help the environment in our cities, to address climate change, to protect children from heat, and improving the green environment in our school grounds. Any investments we make now will also be useful later. Next. And just to leave you with a framework here of the way that we're thinking of these things is planning considerations are under the umbrella of equity. Everything we're doing is trying to help all school districts be able to ensure equitable access to high quality education for all students. And then that idea is includes underneath it the problems of figuring out location, the problems of reconfiguring the program, the idea of looking at what's best for children's learning, health, and happiness as they return to school. And we're conscious of the need to figure out how to pay for this, and also of what the impact is to the economy if students are not back on campus full time to let their parents return to work. Next. And now I'll pass it to Emily.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Emily Weiss. I'm the school program director at the Lawrence Hall of Science. I am going to break us into breakout groups. Well, actually, Jetta's going to do it for us. And what I'd like us to discuss in the breakout groups is we just heard a little bit of an intro to these ideas, and we would really love to know what it is that brought you here today. What are you excited about? So we want you to answer 3 questions. What's most exciting to you about this idea? What are the most compelling messages for different stakeholder groups? You can see there are a bunch of different stakeholders that might get these messages. And what are you curious about? What are you wanting to know more about? Thank you all for participating in the first breakout room. We'll go back to breakout rooms again a little bit later and dig a little deeper into some of the specifics. So I'm turning it over to our next speaker.
Sorry, it's me again, Sharon Danks, back with you, to share some of the ideas that dig a little deeper into the how might we do this question. And that said, this is all brand new, and we're figuring it out. So this is we're sharing a new idea with you and looking for your feedback on it. But we've started to go down into the details to see both what outdoor infrastructure planning strategies might look like, and also my colleague Vanessa Carter will present some ideas on reconfiguring educational models, programming, and staffing. Next, please. So first, when we think at the school level about what's needed here and what to consider when you take learning outside, every school is different, and it's important to really think about what the physical aspects of your school grounds are and what kinds of characteristics there are that will help you determine your capacity outside. And so first is figuring out what your capacity needs to be. If you're planning to address some of the kids inside in the classrooms, how many remain to be placed outside. So knowing what numbers you're aiming at. And then looking at what outdoor infrastructure you already have that you can use, and that might be seating or shelter or gardens or other resources for hands-on learning too. Thinking about your climate, is it temperate? Do you have wind or too much heat or too much rain or snow? And how can you think about those in advance and plan for that? Seating placement, both how proximity to the building and also being sure to put students in places where they're going to be facing away from the sun, so they don't have sun in their eyes while they're trying to look at the teacher speaking to them. And locating them far enough apart where they won't be overhearing each other's teachers all day. Thinking too about what kind of external resources you have, where are the parks that are in your neighborhood, how might you get funding for materials, thinking about staff capacity and availability, and do they need training, and is there external support that can help you with those important details. And then of course equity, which underlies all of this, these questions, and it's looking at the need to and the ability to meet everyone's needs outside. Next, please. So we have a few case studies that are thought experiments. They're not schools that are necessarily moving in this direction. We just picked 2 schools in different climates to explore ideas about what it might look like in their location if we planned for outdoor learning. And a piece of what underlies that discussion is on the left of this slide, which is thinking about how students might be accommodated outside 6 feet apart. We have different configurations for different size groupings. Thinking that many schools will be looking at making their classes into half class size groupings for either indoors or outdoors. So we're using numbers that are between 10 and 16 students, and mostly planning for the end that's 14 to 16 students. And also recognizing that outside, a teacher's voice might only be able to carry about 20-25 feet. So you really don't want to go up to the 30-foot diameter circle if you can avoid it. Next slide. So we started this thought experiment with one school in the Los Angeles region in a hot, dry location. It's a public elementary school with 558 kids in K-5, over 28 different classes. This is a school that might be considering the 50% or half class size groupings. It's on a 9-acre campus. It has 18 separate buildings where each classroom has external doors, so all the hallways are outside. This school is not close to a park, and it's in a place that's really hot and dry, often over 100 degrees, and the weather is actually too hot to go outside in the fall. So they would be looking at this type of plan from November to May. And they also have Santa Ana winds, really strong winds that blow through their city in October. So that's also a rough time to be outside, and it might be on and off during that time. So they would need to make another plan for when it's too hot or windy. Next. So here's some photos of what it looks like on the ground at this school. And you can see there's a mix of grass and asphalt and some large mature shade trees. What you also see in the bottom left is that they're already using their outside areas as breakout group space. And these are just images from Google Maps, and they even caught a small table and chair set in the past outside a classroom door. So we're building on that idea here. And then also they've got an extensive array of solar panels in the parking lot that casts some of the largest canopied shade on the ground. So we were considering that as well. Next. So the first step in our analysis was to look at, well, if the low cost model, if they don't pay for any additional infrastructure, how many kids could they put outside right now? And how big would those groupings be? So we took the models that were from that first page of the arrangements of kids in circles and in squares. And we found the round circles there are 26 feet across, and the squares can accommodate about 7 kids and a teacher. And we found that if we use the places that are shady on the shady sides of their buildings, and we and in those cases, those classrooms just shift their furniture right outside the door to the outside space, they can really move in a lot of places quite easily. And then around the perimeter of the school site, with a no cost or low cost model, they might be bringing out comfortable mats to sit on the ground, on the grass, under the tree. And in this scenario, of the 558 kids at the school, they could get maybe 453 outside at the same time in 43 seating areas. And now only 16 of those seating areas would be big enough for a whole half class to sit in. So, and 27 additional areas would be breakout space, essentially. And that would be useful for teachers who wanted to spread their indoor kids from the inside to the outside, because they can see them through the windows, and they said they're comfortable with watching kids both inside and outside the class if they're immediately outside with one teacher. Next. And you'll see also that there's classrooms we've put under the solar panels in the parking lot with the idea that during the school day, the parking lot would be closed off with cones, and there'd be no cars moving there. But it is a hot and uninviting spot. So those are not high priority locations, but they're possible. Let's see. So in this scenario, we also looked at how if they made a small investment in infrastructure, if they put up canopies that were made out of cloth that could retract in the days with high winds, they could pull the cloth canopies over the edges of the buildings that are already shady. All of those edges could then accommodate a full half class outside. And so you'll see the blue squares of the full half class sitting under the yellow rectangles of shade canopies. And in this scenario, they could get 636 children, which is more than their capacity of 558 in enrollment, in 44 seating areas. And 37 of those could accommodate a full half class, and 7 additional spaces would be useful for small group work. But as I said, some of these locations, like under the solar panels, are not ideal. Next. So the third scenario we looked at here was what would be ideal if you know now what the universe of possible and easy to do locations looks like. What would you pick from that as the best places? And so this is a map of what they consider the best places, which is under the deep canopies of the trees, under the shade cloths next to the classroom, and in some existing picnic table areas that are covered. And so in this scenario, each class would have both its indoor full classroom and its outside full classroom space. We've spread them out a little bit more so that the classes are not right next to each other as they were in the previous one. And we're assuming that the students would not want to be seated all day, so that they would each be moving around a little bit more and have some space to do hands-on learning or just to get up and stretch. We've left the playground and the field open for PE classes and out of the way of recess, so that's still functional. And we've put these classes into place that'll make it convenient and comfortable. And we have found that we could include a half class space for all 28 of the classrooms on site, and plus 6 extra space for small group work. So what this means is that if only 50% of their enrolled student population returns, that entire 50% could sit outside all day, every day, if they wanted to. And if they were to invite back all 100% of their students, half of them could be inside all day and the other half could be outside all day. And then they could alternate days, whether they're on the indoors or the outside. So they actually could fit all the students on the site. Next slide.
1 minute.
Oh, okay, I'll be fast.
You might need to skip this.
I'll be fast.
Yeah.
Yep. So this one is about, you got the general idea. This one is in a temperate climate in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's a school that abuts a park. Next slide. There's the front and the inside. Next slide. And so we found too at this school that this school could accommodate all 50% of their students outside in their own property on this slide, and then next slide. And an additional 50% of their students in outdoor classrooms at the adjacent park. So they could also take 100% of the students. Next slide. And then these we'll be sharing the PDF, so we don't need to go through all these in detail, but basically this is just a section to say that cost is relative. It depends what you have on your site already. It depends if you can get things for free like log rounds. Next slide. Think about seating, think about rain and shade shelters. Next slide. And outdoor teaching supplies and storage areas for what we think 1 per grade level. Next slide. And making the environment comfortable if it's not already, both in terms of seating and planting, if you can, whether it's just pots. Next slide. Great. And now I'll pass the torch to Vanessa.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to everyone who has made time in your day amidst everything in the world that's pulling at our hearts and our attention. My name is Vanessa Carter. I am the Environmental Literacy Content Specialist for the San Francisco Unified School District. And I'm returning to the slide that Craig opened with to reground us and why we're here. The institutionalized racism that permeates our nation is part of the challenge we're trying to address as we engage in this both radical and fundamental redesign of education. The communities of color who are directly targeted by police violence are often the same communities suffering a legacy of environmental racism, the same frontline communities being hit first and worst by the climate crisis, and they're often the same young people whose educational experience reveals an achievement gap So how is this expressing itself right now? It's certainly already been referenced that distance or emergency learning is not equitably serving our students. I heard that echoed in our first breakout group as well. So as people engaged in this design challenge, we have to ask ourselves, are we designing with equity at the center? Next slide, please. So my colleagues at the Lawrence Hall of Science ask if we are designing for the margins, because if a solution will work for the most vulnerable, then it's likely to serve those with relative privilege. So consider the students who are not thriving right now. The demographics described on this slide represent a lot of our students. So let's say that you and your organization, your school district, let's say that you've made a commitment to design for the margins and to have equity at the center. And you've got school or district or even county-wide interest in using outdoor spaces. And let's say that we've figured out the infrastructure challenge that Sharon just gave us a really comprehensive overview about and figured out, okay, we can teach outside either on our campus or using local parks where they are accessible and safe. So the next layer of the design challenge, and I have out of the corner of my eye seen this floating by in the chat, is how do we pull this off with current staff who did not necessarily sign up to teach outside? And if we partner with outside organizations, who pays for them? Who teaches who, and who's legally responsible? Next slide. And I think if everyone could mute, that would be great. I'll run us through a few scenarios that might serve as launching points for each of your contexts. We're certainly familiar with spreading students out through time to accommodate social distancing, where the cohorts of students come through in shifts either on the same day or on alternate days or even weeks. And some districts have proposed spreading elementary students out onto all of the middle and high school campuses as well, assuming that older students can manage distance emergency learning and that younger students are less likely to be impacted as significantly by COVID-19 if they were to be symptomatic. Those are big assumptions, big ifs. But what would it look like if we spread outdoors? Next slide. So let's say that you are determined to figure this out with your current staff. We know that budgets for the coming year and beyond will be significantly compromised and that we'd like to protect our current district employees from layoffs. And we know that this semester's experiment in distance learning revealed that no one's job looks like it used to before the pandemic. So I'll start by saying union engagement is really critical. Unions are concerned with ensuring the safety of their members. We need to be designing for the margins there too. How do we keep vulnerable populations amongst our staff safe as well? And in any modification of roles, how do we support teachers to feel confident in expanding their responsibilities? So holding these questions, let's consider a few scenarios. Some districts will continue with blended learning, where a few master teachers provide the online content so that these master teachers become the experts in distance learning platforms and resources. And this frees up the vast majority of other teachers to focus on small group engagement with students in outdoor learning spaces. Other districts are co-creating modified job descriptions for paras, librarians, TOSAs, administrators, counselors, specialists, and elective teachers to pair them with classroom teachers. So this would allow for classes to be split where most, if not all, students on campus are there at once, half in the classroom and half outdoors, as Sharon referenced in her case studies. This would require a lot of collaboration among colleagues, extensive PD, and a flexible workforce, which will certainly continue to be part of the COVID recovery. Next slide. Other districts will continue with distance learning with occasional minimal in-person rotations of students, maybe 1 day per week max, and run small pilots. For example, pilot outdoor schools for the most vulnerable populations who are being least served by distance learning as a proof of concept for wider adoption within the district and as a model for others. One version of this proposal that I've learned about involves working with a small group of experienced teachers from multiple schools who are already bought into the idea of outdoor learning and who already work with one of the targeted populations. Students would gather daily at a central location, either on district property or in a local park for outdoor school. The administrator of record could be the site administrator where the pilot outdoor school is located, obviously you would want someone who's enthusiastic about the idea. Or it could come from central office if there's someone with a flexible enough portfolio and approach to work that working outside would be a blessing and not a burden. The appeal of this model is there's buy-in from all of the adult staff involved, and it's the small scale nature as a pilot makes it doable. The drawback is the urgency to design for the margins at a district scale when the time is now when students are falling behind. Let's look at the next slide. And finally, I want to propose the wildest idea yet, and it's what Craig led with at the beginning. So if that last idea wasn't crazy enough for you, and if I could ask everyone to mute, that would be great. Thank you. How might school districts partner with non-formal education institutions to increase their staff of professional educators? So we're talking about outdoor education naturalists, experiential field trip providers, science museum educators, garden educators. What if teachers split their classes so that half of their students were inside with the lead teacher and the other half were outside with the education partner staff? This would be a series of formal partnerships at the district level, not a teacher by teacher or even a school by school arrangement. It's just too complicated. Partners are desperate to pivot their work and support schools based on what schools want and need. Partners' short-term distance learning support has only been a piece of what they have to offer. We have this vast network of experienced professionals who are recently and very suddenly out of work, wanting nothing more than to return to engage with students. Organizations' revenue dried up overnight when schools transitioned to distance learning, and so their staff were either furloughed or laid off. These educators have the comfort and familiarity of working in non-classroom settings. So what would stretch many teachers beyond their comfort zone is the comfort zone of these partner educators. And it's mutually beneficial. We get kids back to school learning safely and equitably, and these partner organizations don't vanish. So I'd like to pause for a minute and invite Andra Yagoyan from the San Mateo County Office of Education, who will give us some examples of what this looks like in her county, because it turns out there's a lot of interest. Thanks, Andra.
Yes, thanks, Vanessa, and thank you for really introducing this idea so well. So we have a number of principals across a number of school districts in our county who had already reached out earlier on before we even put this idea out to the public, who said, hey, I have some outdoor space and I'm really interested in thinking about how to use it better. And that's what got me involved into this process, is reaching out to Sharon and reaching out to Vanessa and seeing, like, how can we do this? And then we have also had a couple of our school districts, both our high school districts and our elementary school districts, who are seriously looking at the outdoor space. When I saw that Sharon had put the solar panel thing, that came up in our conversations this morning with some school districts. They said, like, hey, we've got all these great shading areas. Can we do that? So I'd say for us in San Mateo County, there's interest, and it's interest from site level principals, it's interest from district folks. So I think this idea is catching traction. And of course, all these concerns about how to staff it are there, but people are very interested in how to reorganize with specialists and other things that Vanessa has mentioned. So I do think that we're actively looking to move this forward in San Mateo County.
That's great. Thanks, Andra. So I haven't been able to read all of the chat, but I'm sure it's a lot about who and is it legal and who will pay for it. So who will pay for this? Certainly not the districts. The philanthropic sector has largely pivoted to COVID recovery. And so I think we have a responsibility to educate the philanthropic sector that this investment is COVID recovery, because it means getting students back to school, it means getting the non-formal education industry back to work, and it means getting families back to work now that their kids can go back to school. So it's all connected. And
Vanessa, 1 minute.
Perfect. These recently laid off professionals, many of them are receiving federal unemployment. So imagine if we reinvested that money directly in putting folks back to work. So this would be a massive shift to the recovery effort, whether it's shifting dollars to AmeriCorps or the Conservation Corps, or right back to their original employers. And obviously this would take some advocacy. Next slide, please. Fortunately, the Lawrence Hall of Science, along with other partners, including 10 Strands, just released a policy brief that describes the state of the sector and how the pandemic has impacted them and the possibilities of pivoting their original work to support schools. And we'll put a link in the chat to this policy brief. So soon there will be a direct advocacy ask, and we'll follow up with that amongst all of these other resources that we want to share with you. But in the meanwhile, we invite you to do some community mapping of your local partners and open these conversations. In likelihood, your teachers are already engaged with them, but without the positional power to do much beyond appreciate their distance learning resources. So as leaders of districts, look to the community for these remarkable relationships. Ask your teachers, ask your environmental literacy content specialists, ask your families, they hear about the best field trips, ask your students, they know about the internships and the summer enrichment programs, and ask local family foundations, community foundations, and corporate foundations, because they've been the ones funding all of this good work and would love to see proposals of how these organizations might pivot to be part of COVID recovery plans. Thank you. With that, I'll pass it back to Emily so we can chew on some of these ideas.
Great, thank you. So as a person who is in charge of helping keep a bunch of people employed who have this expertise, because I'm at an informal institution at Lawrence Hall of Science, I really, really love this idea because I'm so excited to have a way to put a very skilled workforce to use in this crisis, and they're excited to dive in. So what I wanted us to do right now is get into breakout rooms again. I believe we'll be in the same breakout room, so you won't have to reintroduce yourselves. And what I'd like us to do is take this opportunity to hear from so many people in a brief amount of time. We have this really unprecedented opportunity to get input from you about what are the things we need to be thinking about. We've been doing a lot of thinking. You can tell there's been a lot of thinking presented, and we've done more beyond what's just been presented here. But we want to harvest as many ideas as we can about the obstacles, barriers, things that you're putting in the chat window right now. We'd really like you to poke as many holes as you possibly can in the various portions of our plan. So what we'd like you to do is get back on Padlet, and you'll see that after those first 3 columns in Padlet, there's a whole bunch of different topics. They're the topics we've brought up so far, like plans to ensure equity, outdoor infrastructure, park school collaboration. So you can go through those different categories. And what I'd like you to be writing about are, what are you worried about? What are the challenges? What would need to be solved in order for an outdoor learning solution to work? Okay, so we're going to put you back into those breakout groups, and those of you on live stream, you can keep contributing to the Padlet. And we'll do this for about 20 to 25 minutes. Okay, thanks. Thanks everybody for participating in our second breakout room. I know we had some really interesting discussions in ours, so I hope you were able to have interesting ones in yours, and those of you in the live stream. I saw the Padlet was really getting a lot of action, so I'm hoping some of that was coming from you. I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker.
Thank you, Emily. Okay, hi everybody. So 10 minutes to go, and I'm just going to wrap up here. So I'm Karen Cow. I'm the CEO of 10 Strands. We're a California-based nonprofit focused on advancing the environmental literacy of students in the our students in the K-12 public school system. So first, I just want to thank the presenters and today and Emily for facilitating the breakout sessions and all of the activity that came as a result of those breakout sessions and the contributions that everybody made to the Padlet. And so thank you also to you. There's about 250 of us still participating directly in the webinar. And just to say also that really, we only really designed this day as a start. We just a few of us got together and we thought that we put our thoughts together, and we just wanted to put them out there really to seek participation, contribution and participation. So these are the topics that you've been thinking about on the screen right now. These are the topics that were in the Padlet and Sharon introduced earlier, and Craig even earlier than that. And so how do we move from where we're at right now, which is brainstorming just together as a small group, and then with you as a much bigger group, to something that we can usefully put together for the field. So next slide, please. So what we are thinking we'd like to do is to convene 8 working groups around these topics and dig in the next 6 weeks to see, to focus on designing from the edges, as Craig and Vanessa described, and to dig in and see what we can do to problem solve against some of the obstacles that immediately surface around these different topics. And the goal would be to produce something, well, to develop some frameworks, some strategies, and some resources that we can put together to share with school districts. And we know that time is of the essence, and we know that school districts are needing to make decisions right now and get messages out before sort of school closes for the summer. But we still think that it's worth doing, and because we think these ideas are good whenever, you know, whether we have COVID as a backdrop or not. And so that's what we'd like to do. And we'd like to move quickly. That's why we're saying 6 weeks, and then to put something together to share with everybody. So just think about whether that's something that you would like to contribute to. And at the very end, we're going to send everybody a survey, and part of that survey will be asking you to see what you would like to sign up for. Next slide, please. So very next step is you're going to get this survey, and then we'll send all of the information that we've shared today to everybody as well. So the presentation, the brief, the presentation, and then the policy brief that we talked about from the Lawrence Hall of Science, we'll also make sure we get that shared, and then also the Padlet. So everybody will have everything. And then we would like to convene again late July. If anybody has any questions in the meantime, don't email me. You can email Sharon. No, Sharon has graciously agreed to receive all emails, so whatever's on your mind. So she's sharon@greenschoolyards.org. And then finally, next slide. All right, so we just thought, like, what could you actually do as a result of being here today before we convene in working groups and before we create anything else? And so these are a few thoughts that we had, that you could indeed talk to your principal or your grounds and facilities managers or the superintendent at either the district or the county office of ed, and just expose them to these ideas, expose them to these preliminary thoughts, and invite their contribution and involvement. If you are connected, I saw at the very beginning, we had a lot of parents involved on the call. And so if you're involved in your local PTA, to just think about this idea and think about how some PTA funds might be earmarked for some of these lower cost solutions. If you're able to sort of offer to be a contact for your school or your district or your county as resources get produced, published, and distributed, so that you can be the sort of conduit for this work that's emerging for your community. And then obviously when you're in receipt of everything that we're about to send you, the 2-page PDF, the recording of the webinar, the Padlet, the policy brief, I know it's a lot, it would be wonderful if you could share that not only within your immediate work setting, but to other networks that you're a part of. I mean, that's why it was, I think, that we actually had 900 people signing up for this webinar, because we put our networks to work to encourage people to participate. So with that, I think there's one more closing thing. If you, well, first of all, yeah, thank you again. And then I think the very next thing, I don't know if somebody from the hall wants to talk about this, but Emily or Jeddah, but about the survey link, if there's anything in particular that you'd like to add about that. Emily, Jeddah?
I don't really have anything to add other than that we've pasted the survey link into the chat a bunch of times just so it keeps popping up for you. And I just realized I'm not sure on the live stream how they're getting the survey link. So maybe Jeddah, if you could speak to that. Thanks.
Yeah, folks on the live stream, I've pasted the link in the chat for you as well. And it's also going to be going out in Sharon's follow-up email to everyone who was registered. So if you're on this meeting somehow and you weren't able to register, make sure you register on the Eventbrite so that we have your email and can get you all the follow-up information.
Okay, with that, we'll close. Thank you very much, everybody. It was a pleasure spending the last 90 minutes with you, and we'll be in touch, and we really look forward to continuing these conversations. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you
everyone.
very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
That's good because we're waving now.
I liked recording all of those thank yous. That was nice.
Thanks.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi.
Thank you
Oh,
so
Sharon.
much.